Welcome back to Dog Parentology, where we explore system science and the deeper connection between dogs, their families, and you, the professional, and the systems that shape their behavior. I'm Sparky Smith, and today we're going to be diving into something that might sound a bit academic at first, but I promise you, this tool may just inspire you to explore system science a little bit more deeply because it's an old science and it's been applied all over the place, including veterinary practices. So this is going to change how you see your cases that walk through your door. Have you ever worked with a dog where you've addressed one problem only to have another pop up? Or maybe you've had that frustrating experience where traditional training techniques work temporarily, but the dog seems to have slipped back to old patterns? Well, today we're talking about causal loop diagrams, or CLDs. It's a simple but powerful tool that helps us to see why dogs get stuck and where we can intervene most effectively. So let's set the stage. Let me paint a picture for you that I know will resonate with many of you. You're working with a reactive dog. Let's call him Ollie. Classic story. He barks at other dogs. His stress levels are through the roof. His human is getting increasingly frustrated. You implement counter-conditioning protocols, maybe some bat work, and things improve for a while. Then suddenly you're back to square one. Sound familiar? Here's what I've learned. We often focus on obvious behavior, the barking, the lunging, the reactivity, without seeing the invisible web of connections that actually drive the whole system. So what is causal loop diagrams, or CLDs? A causal loop diagram, or CLD, is essentially a map of how different elements in a dog's life influence each other in circles. Think of it like this. Instead of looking at behavior as a straight line from trigger to response, we look at it as a continuous loop where each element feeds back into the others. The beauty of this approach is that it matches what we intuitively know as dog professionals. Behavior is never happening in isolation. It's always part of a larger system. It's always part of a larger system that includes the dog's physical state, emotional state, environment, and yes, the human state too. Okay, here are the building blocks. Let me break down the simple components you need to create these diagrams. Pause here and grab a piece of paper and a pen, and we'll get started. Variables. These are just the different elements that can go up and down. Things like stress levels, sleep quality, barking frequency, caregiver confidence, or exercise levels. There are a few of them. Now, the arrows that will connect these variables, that's important. They show how variables affect one another. They are connections, not linear pathways. Now, for anyone out there that might be into Six Sigma or processes, let me just explain that they are not pathways. They are not steps. And that was really hard for me to learn being a Six Sigma black belt. So it's really important to know that these are just connections. So for linear thinkers out there, yes, I see you. Make lines as connections. Arrows show effect of those connections. Now, effect has directions. So we use a plus sign when we move in the same direction, like more stress leads to more barking. We use a minus sign when they move in the opposite direction. So more sleep leads to less stress. Let's pause here and sketch this out together.
Think of your dog like a cup of coffee brewing. You don't get flavor from one single drop. You get it from the interaction of heat, grind, water, and time. Likewise, your dog's behavior isn't just about a single trigger or command. It's the outcome of loops, reinforcing ones that escalate behavior and balancing ones that settle it. If you want a different flavor in your dog's behavior, You have to change the loops, not just the surface. Let's start simple. We're looking at a dog who barks at triggers. Could be other dogs, people, cars, whatever sets them off. So our first variable is obvious. Dog barks. Write that down. Now ask yourself, what causes this barking? Well, the dog sees or hears something that triggers them. So our second variable is triggers. Write that one down too. Oh, here's where it gets interesting. Draw an arrow from triggers to dog barks and put a plus sign next to it. That plus sign means they move in the same directions. More triggers, meaning more barking. Simple enough, right? But we're not done. Because when a dog barks, something happens inside their body. Their stress level goes up. So let's add a third variable, stress. Draw an arrow from dog barks to stress. And again, put a plus sign. More barking equals more stress. Now here's where the loop really starts to form. When stress goes up, what happens to the dog's nervous system? They become more sensitive to triggers. It's like turning up the volume on their alarm system, right? So let's add another variable, trigger sensitivity. Draw an arrow from stress to trigger sensitivity with a plus sign. Higher stress makes them more sensitive. Okay, now stay with me because this next part is where it clicks. When a dog is more sensitive to triggers, what do? Well, we all know they start scanning the environment more. They're on high alert, looking for threats. This is called trigger scanning. Add that variable, arrow from trigger sensitivity to trigger scanning, and the plus sign. And here's the kicker. When a dog is scanning for more triggers, they notice more of them. Even things that they might have ignored before become threats. So draw one more arrow from trigger scanning back to triggers, the plus sign. Now look at what we have here. Do you see it? We've created a complete loop. It flows in a circle. Triggers lead to dog barks, which increases stress, which heightens trigger sensitivities, which causes more trigger scanning, which means they notice more triggers, and we're back where we started. This is called a reinforcing loop. Every time you go around the circle, it gets stronger. More triggers create more barking, which creates more stress, which creates more sensitivity, which finds more triggers. The behavior amplifies itself. And here's why this matters. If you only try to stop the barking, let's say you correct the dog every time they react, you haven't changed any of the other variables. The stress is still there. The trigger sensitivity is still high. The scanning behavior continues. So the barking comes right back, often worse than before, because now you've added more stress to an already stressed system. This is what we mean by treating symptoms versus addressing the system. Many training and behavior courses still focus on that one variable, dog barks. But you can see now that the barking isn't the problem. It's just one part of a bigger pattern that keeps feeding itself. When you understand the loop, you can ask better questions like, where in the cycle could we intervene? What if we reduced the triggers during walks? What if we found ways to lower baseline stress? What if we helped the dog feel safe enough that they didn't need to scan constantly? And I know many of you do this very intuitively. The value of causal loop diagramming happens in complex cases when we can't see everything. So remember, we're learning here a very simple exercise. So the value of causal loop diagramming will not be evident. This is about teaching you how to do it. Okay? All right, now let's make this more realistic because here's the thing. The basic loop we just drew, it doesn't exist in isolation. There are other variables affecting the system. Let's add one of the most important ones, sleep. Take your diagram, find the stress variable, and we're going to add something that connects to it. When the dog is highly stressed, what happens to their sleep quality? It goes down. Just like us, dogs who are stressed don't sleep well. They're restless, they wake up easy, their sleep is lighter and less restorative. So add a new variable to your diagram, sleep quality. Now draw an arrow from stress to sleep quality. But here's where we need to pay attention to the polarity, which is the plus and minus signals. When stress goes up, sleep quality goes down. They move in the opposite direction. So this arrow gets a minus sign.
Now, here's when the loop gets nasty. What happens when the dog doesn't sleep well? They wake up the next day more stressed. Poor sleep quality feeds right back into higher stress levels. So we're going to draw an arrow from poor sleep quality back to stress and put a plus signal there. More poor sleep equals more stress. Look at what you've created. You now have a second loop. Stress disrupts sleep, and poor sleep increases stress. It's another reinforcing cycle spinning right along the first one. And these two loops that we've created, they're connected through that stress variable. So now you can see how everything compounds. The dog has a reactive episode on the walk, stress goes up. That night they don't sleep well. The next morning they wake up with their stress baseline already elevated, which means their trigger sensitivity is higher from the start, which means more scanning, more triggers noticed, more reactivity, more stress. And that night, even worse sleep, right? So CLDs help us to see, even in this simple example, why a reactive dog often seems to get worse over time, even with good plans. Because the sleep deprivation is creating a cumulative effect. Each day, they're starting from a higher stress baseline than the day before, and we're still not done. In the full diagram, we'll add even more variables. But you're getting the idea now of how these systems work and how to create a CLD, right? So now let's say because this loop has continued for some time, the dog is lunging and barking, snarling, whatever is making them triggered. Let's just change barking to a simple term, reactivity. And now we're going to add in the human element, because what we're hearing more and more about, right, is that the human is a critical element in resolving dog behavior issues. And we all kind of knew that, I think, anyway. So dogs don't exist in a vacuum. They live with people, and people have emotions. And those emotions, they become part of the system, and they are data that helps us find leverage points. So let's look at your diagram and find the reactivity variable. Let's think about what happens when the dog reacts, when they bark, lunge, or show stress behaviors. The human sees this and they worry. They think my dog is getting worse, or what if they bite someone, or everyone's staring at us. So let's add in a new variable, human worry. Okay, draw an arrow from reactivity to human worry and put a plus sign, because more reactivity creates more worry in the human, right? Now, what does a worried human typically do? Well, they try to control the situation more. They tighten the leash, they pull the dog away faster, they become more tense and vigilant themselves. They start avoiding situations or over-managing every interaction. So let's add another variable, tighter control. Draw an arrow from human worry to tighter control with a plus sign. More worry leads to more controlling behavior. Here's where it gets really important. What happens to the dog when the human gets tense and controlling? The dog's stress goes up, right? They can feel the tension coming down the leash. They sense the person is worried, which signals to them that there's really is something to worry about. Let's draw an arrow from tighter control back to stress, that central variable that already is connecting our other loops, and put a plus sign on it. More control from the human increases the dog's stress. Now look at what you've just created. Another reinforcing loop. Reactivity causes human worry, which leads to tighter controls, which increase dog stress, which feeds back into trigger sensitivity, which creates more reactivity. And we're right back to human worry. The CLD shows the human emotional state is part of the system. You can teach the dog all the skills in the world, but if the human is broadcasting anxiety and tension, that's feeding stress right back into the system. Here's what else we can see now. Notice how this human loop connects to everything else. It links into stress variables, which connects to both the reactivity loop and the sleep loop. So when the human is worried and controlling, they're not just affecting that one moment of the walk. They're affecting the dog's sleep that night, their baseline stress the next day, their trigger sensitivity all week long. Now step back and look at your full diagram. You should see 3 interconnected loops: the reactivity loop, triggers, barking, stress, sensitivity scanning; the sleep loop, stress and poor sleep feeding each other; and the human loop, reactivity, worry, control, back to stress. All 3 are spinning together, all influencing each other, all connected through key variables like stress and reactivity. This is what a behavioral system actually looks like. The solution to understanding which loops to interrupt, which variables to change, and where the leverage points are in the system, well, that's where you find it, right there. In the free guide available for download, you can see next steps on finding leverage points and how to draw that into this loop and see the impact. Okay, so the cool thing about causal loops, and if you decide to Google this or go onto Wikipedia and put in causal loops, what's really cool is you will find a couple of different people, and one of them is Danilo Meadows. Danilo Meadows is one of many inspirational role models for me. I think she's just fantastic, but I digress. So she discovered how to find leverage points, causal loop diagrams. And she's got some famous lectures online. They're quite old, so look for black and white, where she talks to a university class about deer population. And it's fascinating to watch. Once you get a hang of it, you'll really see the power of causal loops. But the key thing is that hidden leverage points, what hidden leverage points does, which is so important for us, is that it ensures that we're working smarter, not harder. So we can find in a complex case 1 or 2 things that changes everything. And that's where the magic happens for us as professionals, right? When you map out these interconnected loops, you start seeing leverage points that aren't obvious when you just were looking at surface behaviors. So how do you start using this? I recommend beginning with cases that feel stuck. Those dogs where traditional approaches aren't quite hitting the mark. First, map out the obvious loop. You have to start with the most obvious. Don't think you can put everything in, especially if you've just walked away from a session going, oh, I just dealt with the father and he doesn't get any of this. And I think he's been undermining the whole program. Well, don't worry about that. Start with the obvious loop around the main behavior concern. And how does it reinforce itself? Then step back and ask, what other variables might be influencing the system, which is where you can take the father and put him in there and actually record that as a variable. And my recommendation always is to do it in a way that if he saw the piece of paper and your diagram, that he would not be offended. And that's just straightforward change management. We always want to make sure that we could use the diagram in the future to maybe help illustrate why things are happening. So put in something like Ted's video recommendations, right? Especially if he's looking at videos that are talking about using aversives, right? But also don't worry about just what's on the surface of your immediate requirement to do a causal loop. Also, let's look at sleep patterns, exercise routines, the human stress level, household dynamics, even things like diet or medical issues that may be the cause of that behavior. Start connecting these into additional loops. You'll often find that what looks like one problematic behavior is actually several interconnected patterns. It's true. And the real breakthrough comes when you identify the natural balancing forces in the system, the things that should be providing stability but aren't functioning properly. These are often your highest leverage intervention points. The caregiver connection. I want to spend a moment on something that these diagrams consistently reveal: the profound impact of the human's emotional state on dogs' behavior systems. As professionals, we often focus intensely on modifying the dog's behavior while treating the human role as secondary. And if you think you've adopted the human caregiver as part of your practice now that more information has come out, I'm going to challenge you a little bit. I'm going to say, do you give up and walk away if the human is resistant to what you're suggesting? Because what I love about this approach is how it shifts us from being behavior fixers to being a system observer. So what's next? Level 2, designing better interventions. Now, once you get comfortable with level 1, you're ready for level 2. Level 2 is where we add what I call stock thinking to your causal loop diagrams. This is where things get really practical. Level 2 helps you design better interventions by answering questions like, how much exercise does this dog actually need to offset their daily trigger exposure? How long does it take to build up confidence reserves in anxious dogs? What's the minimum recovery time this particular dog needs between stressful events? Instead of guessing those answers, level 2 gives you a framework for thinking about what builds up a dog over time, like stress, confidence, or fatigue versus what happens in single moments, like training sessions or barking episodes. When you understand this difference, you can design interventions that work with how dogs actually process and recover from their experiences rather than against it. In our next episode, I'll walk you through exactly how to add this stock thinking to your causal loop diagrams and how it changes the way you approach training plans. We'll dive into how to calculate those how much and how long questions that can make the difference between interventions that work temporarily and interventions that create change, lasting change. Okay, that's all for me today. I hope you have a great day, and please let me know in the comments below how much you enjoyed this video, and let me know how you're using the guide. Love to hear from you. Bye for now.